The screaming was not human. That detail appears again and again in the surviving notes, not as an assumption, but as a conclusion reached reluctantly after careful comparison. The men who heard it were experienced. They knew the sound of pain, panic, and death. They had worked underground long enough to recognize echoes, collapses, and the tricks of confined air. What they heard in the caves that winter did not behave like any of those things. It moved, it changed distance without footsteps, and it screamed as if the stone itself had learned how to suffer. The year was 1910, deep winter in a high, forested region where limestone ridges cut through pine and snow like exposed bone. The land was sparsely mapped, its cave systems known only in fragment shafts discovered by accident, tunnels abandoned when the air grew thin, or the walls too unstable. The mountain had a reputation. Coups said sound traveled incorrectly there, that cries could return before they were finished being spoken, that animals avoided certain openings even in storms. Those warnings were not written down. The expedition was. At the base of the mountain stood a temporary logging camp, 36 men housed in rough timber structures, smoke rising constantly from iron stoves. The camp existed to strip the forest, not to explore what lay beneath it. But when blasting exposed a narrow cave entrance along the ridge face, curiosity followed opportunity. Cold air poured from the opening even in daylight, steady and deep, carrying a mineral smell that did not belong to the surface world. It breathed. That was how the loggers described it. The decision to explore the caves came quickly and without ceremony. 4 men volunteered. They were not reckless boys chasing rumor. Each had reasoned professional or personnel to descend. Edgar Mullins, the expedition leader, 38, former surveyor turned industrial engineer. Mullins believed that everything could be mapped if approached methodically. Unknown spaces offended him. Samuel Crow, a mining foreman with 15 years underground. Broad-shouldered, quiet, deeply practical. Crow trusted sound more than sight. Thomas Avery, a young geologist, fresh from university, eager to document untouched formations. Avery kept meticulous field notes and sketched constantly. Jonah Pike, a laborer from the logging crew, chosen not for expertise, but familiarity. Pike had grown up near cave country and claimed he could feel bad stone. The camp manager approved the descent reluctantly. "Go in daylight," he warned, "and don't stay long." The entrance was narrow but clean, as if weather had polished it deliberately. Frost clung to the stone lip, and thin icicles formed where warm surface air met, the cold breath rising from below. Inside, the temperature dropped sharply. Lantern light revealed walls slick with moisture, veins of pale mineral catching the glow unevenly. The floor sloped downward at a shallow angle, sound carrying farther than it should have. Avery smiled openly. "This system is extensive," he said. "Listen to the echo." Mullins nodded, making notes. Crow said nothing. Within the first 100 yards, the men noticed a silence, not absence of sound but compression. Bootsteps landed softly, as if absorbed. Voices returned faintly, delayed by half a second, then faded too quickly. Dripping water echoed from impossible directions. Pike stopped walking suddenly. "You hear that?" he asked. The others paused. Nothing. Then far below them, something shifted. Not falling rock. Movement. Slow. Deliberate. Crow frowned. Air moving through chambers. Mullins nodded. Temperature gradient. Pike did not move. "That wasn't air," he said quietly. They continued downward. The cave widened unexpectedly, opening into a vaulted chamber where the ceiling vanished beyond lantern reach. Stalactites hung like frozen teeth. The floor dropped away into darkness at the far end, a natural ramp leading deeper. Avery sketched furiously. "This chamber isn't recorded anywhere," he said. "The acoustics," his voice cut off abruptly. Something echoed back, not his words. A fragment of sound, elongated, warped, returned from below, with a tone that did not match his voice at all. Crow stiffened. "That's not an echo." Mullins swallowed. "Probably a secondary shaft." Pike whispered. It answered him. As they descended further, small things went wrong. Avery's chalk marks smeared on stone that should have been dry. The rope dragged unnaturally, snagging where nothing protruded. Lantern flames leaned downward, as if drawn toward the depths. The air grew heavier. Breathing required effort. Then came the smell. Not rot, not damp, something sharp and ancient, like stone ground to fine and left undisturbed for centuries. Crow covered his mouth briefly. "This cave's occupied," he said. Mullins turned sharply. "By what?" Crow shook his head. "Don't know, but something uses this space." It started faintly, so distant it could have been dismissed as wind moving through narrow channels. A thin, wavering sound rose from below, climbing the stone slowly, catching and releasing as it traveled upward. Avery stopped sketching. "Is that?" he began. The sound swelled slightly. Not louder, closer. It was not a single scream. It was many tones folded into one, high and low, overlapping, as if several throats shared the same breath. Pike dropped his pack. "That's not an animal," he said. Animals stopped to breathe. The sound did not stop. Mullins raised a hand. "Hold position." The screaming continued, now unmistakable. It did not echo. It moved, sliding through unseen passages, changing direction without pause, circling beneath them. Crow felt his skin prickle. "It's mapping us by sound." Avery's voice shook. "That's impossible." Pike backed toward the wall. "So is this." The screaming ceased abruptly. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. For several seconds, no one breathed. Then far below the sound returned. "Closer," Mullins spoke slowly, forcing control into his voice. "We are not equipped for this. We ascend." No one argued. As they turned back toward the ramp, something scraped below, not stone on stone, but something moving across stone. "Not fast," Patient Crow whispered. "It knows where we are." Avery asked, barely audible, "How?" Crow did not answer. They reached the chamber entrance again, hearts pounding, every sense strained toward the dark behind them. The screaming did not follow. That disturbed them more than if it had. At the surface, cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Snow fell silently through the trees. The campfires below glowed like distant stars. Mullins wrote one final line in his notebook before closing it. "Sound in lower chambers inconsistent with natural cave acoustics. Source unknown. Movement intelligent." Deep beneath the ridge, long after the men had left the entrance behind, the screaming resumed. Not in panic, in recognition. Because something in the caves had learned an important truth. The men had heard it, and hearing was enough.
What happened here was never fully recorded, and this is only one of many forgotten encounters. Subscribe and continue into the past.
The mountain did not close behind them. That was the first thing Edgar Mullins noticed as they stepped back into daylight. Cold air still poured steadily from the cave mouth, unbroken, unhurried, as if the screaming below had never stopped. The forest above remained silent, too silent. Snow clung to branches without falling. No birds stirred. Even the wind seemed to avoid the ridge, slipping around it rather than over it. The men stood there longer than necessary, listening. Nothing followed them out. And somehow, that felt worse. When they returned to the log-in camp, conversation faltered. Men looked up from saws and fires as the four passed, registering something wrong without knowing what it was. Faces were pale, movements too controlled. Even Jonah Pike, usually restless, walked carefully as if sudden motion might be noticed. The camp manager, Walter Henslow, met them near the main fire. "You were quick," he said. "Find anything worth noting?" Mullins hesitated. Crow answered first. "We found sound that shouldn't exist." That ended the questions. Henslow nodded once and waved them away, but his eyes followed the ridge for the rest of the afternoon. The first scream heard from the surface came just after dusk. It was faint and enough to be mistaken for wind slipping through trees, but it rose from the direction of the ridge, unmistakably aligned with the cave entrance. Men froze, mid-task, axes paused, hands stilled. Someone laughed nervously. Winds picking up, but the trees did not move. The sound faded after several seconds, leaving behind a pressure in the ears that lingered far too long. Crow closed his eyes. "It's carrying farther now," he said. That night, the older loggers spoke quietly among themselves. One mentioned an abandoned prospector camp farther north, where men refused to work after voices came from a shaft. Another recalled a trapper who claimed caves could learn the sound of footsteps and repeat them later, when no one stood nearby. None of these stories had names. They did not need them. Pike listened closely, saying nothing. When the fire burned low, he finally spoke. "My grandfather warned me about places where sound doesn't die," he said. "He said if it comes back changed, don't answer it." A younger man scoffed. "Answer what?" Pike stared into the flames. "The mountain," he said. By the second day, tools went missing. Not stolen, moved. A rope left coiled neatly near the saw pit was found hanging inside an empty supply shed. Lanterns burned out faster than expected. A crate of nails overturned itself during the night without a mark on the lid. Footprints appeared near the cave trail. Not human. Too narrow. Too evenly spaced. Crow examined them carefully. "Weight's wrong," he said. "Too light for the depth." Mullins frowned. "Animal?" Crow shook his head. "Animals drag. These don't." That evening, Thomas Avery made a mistake. Standing near the edge of camp, he called out toward the ridge half, joking, half testing. "Is anyone there?" The words echoed faintly against stone. Then something answered. Not the words. A distorted imitation of the tone, drawn out, warped, returned from deep underground like a voice trying to remember how speech worked. Men stumbled backward. Someone crossed himself. Avery went white. "That's not possible." Crow grabbed his arm. "Don't speak to it again." Later that night, Pike brought something to Mullins. A weathered notebook he'd found while repairing an old storage shed, buried beneath rotting boards and dust. The handwriting was old. The entries, sparse. One line stopped Mullins cold. "Heard screaming again tonight. It doesn't come closer. It waits for listening." There was no date, no name. "If it learns your voice, it keeps it." Mullins closed the book slowly. The shed had not been used in decades. No one slept well after that. Screams rose intermittently through the night, sometimes distant, sometimes close enough to feel through the ground. They never followed a pattern. They never repeated exactly, but they always stopped the moment someone shouted back, as if acknowledging restraint. Pike woke suddenly before dawn, heart racing. He later admitted he dreamed of standing in the cave, screaming and hearing his own voice return from behind him. On the fourth morning, the camp noticed something else. The sound carried better. Axes echoed farther. Voices bounced oddly. Even footsteps seemed louder than before, reverberating faintly as if the ground beneath them had hollowed. Mullins measured the distance to the ridge, unchanged, but the feeling was undeniable. The mountain felt closer. Mullins argued for caution. Henslow argued for answers. "If it's just air movement," Henslow said, "prove it. If it's something worse, we need to know." Crow remained silent until the end. Then he said quietly, "It wants us to come back." Avery looked at him sharply. "How can you know that?" Crow met his gaze. "Because it stopped screaming, as if summoned." The sound rose again, faint but unmistakable. This time, it carried something new. A rhythm, almost like breath. Snow fell heavily as they prepared. The cave entrance steamed visibly now, warm air surging out in slow pulses. Lantern flames bent inward toward the opening, drawn by pressure that could not be explained by draft alone. Pike hesitated at the trailhead. "If we go back down," he said, "it won't just listen." Mullins tightened his gloves. "We go together," he said. "We observe. We do not answer." The screaming faded abruptly as they approached. The mountain held its breath. As the four men reached the cave mouth once more, Mullins paused and looked back at the camp billow fires, glowing weakly through falling snow, men watching in silence. Something had shifted since the first descent. The cave no longer felt discovered. It felt aware. Deep underground, the screaming resumed lower now, steadier, layered with new tones that did not belong to stone or air. It had heard them leave. It had heard them speak. And now it waited patiently for the sound of footsteps returning. The second descent felt different before they even entered the cave. The air around the mouth no longer spilled outward in a steady breath. It pulsed slowly, irregularly, each surge, followed by a brief stillness that pressed against the ears. Snow near the entrance had melted into a shallow crescent, exposing bare stone that glistened faintly under lantern light. Edgar Mullins noticed something else. Their footsteps sounded late. Boots struck stone, but the sound returned a fraction of a second after impact, as if the cave needed time to decide where the noise belonged. No one commented on it. They all heard it. They passed the first chamber quickly, moving with purpose, lanterns held low. The vaulted ceiling swallowed light, its edges blurring into darkness that felt thicker than absent. The screaming did not greet them. That unsettled Crow more than if it had. "Quiet's not good," he muttered. Thomas Avery scribbled notes with shaking hands, sketching the ramp and marking the places where sound behaved strangely. He paused repeatedly, listening, then writing again. Jonah Pike brought up the rear, one hand brushing the wall, as if reading something through touch. "It's changed," he whispered. "The stone's tighter." Mullins frowned. "That's not a geological term." Pike swallowed. "It is where I come from." They reached the lower passage, the one they had not entered before. The tunnel narrowed abruptly, forcing them into single file. Moisture dripped steadily from unseen cracks, each drop echoing too loudly, too far. The air smelt sharper here, tinged with something metallic and old. Then the screaming began again. Not ahead of them. Behind, a layered sound erupted from the direction of the entrance, rising suddenly like breath forced through 1,000 throats at once. It filled the tunnel, reverberating against stone, pressing inward from all sides. Avery spun, lanterns swinging wildly. "It's behind us." Crow raised a hand. "No." The screaming passed them, sliding through the tunnel, as if the sound itself had massed in, continued deeper, retreating into darkness ahead. Mullins felt his stomach drop. "It moved," he said. Without a source. They stood frozen, listening as the sound faded. But it did not diminish naturally. Instead, it fragmented, breaking into shorter bursts. Pauses between them lengthening, as if something were experimenting with silence. Then, unmistakably, one of the sounds returned altered. It carried a faint resemblance to Avery's voice. Not words. Cadence. The same nervous rise at the end of a breath. Avery clutched his notebook to his chest. "That's not possible," Crow whispered. "It's remembering." They emerged into a second chamber, smaller than the first, but more claustrophobic. The ceiling pressed low, the walls closing in unevenly, forcing sound to ricochet unpredictably. Every movement echoed. Not once, several times. Footsteps overlapped themselves, returning from different angles at slightly different speeds. Mullins tried to speak, then stopped. His voice came back, distorted, flattened, stretched thin, as if pulled through narrow stone. Jonah Pike shook his head slowly. "This place keeps what you give it." The screaming returned without warning. Closer now. So close that the lantern flames flickered violently, leaning toward the far wall as if drawn by pressure rather than wind. Avery cried out despite himself. "Who's there?" The screaming stopped. For several heartbeats, the cave held absolute silence. Then something moved at the edge of light. Not stepping, not crawling. A repositioning of darkness in area where the stone behind it seemed to retreat, making room for a shape that did not reflect light properly. Crow felt his skin crawl. "That's not shadow," he said. "Shadows don't block echoes." The shape shifted again, stretching vertically, adjusting, as if learning how much space it occupied. Mullins realized with a sudden chill that it was standing where the tunnel widened, where sound behaved best. Avery raised his lantern higher. The light did not reveal features. It revealed absence. Where the shape stood, reflections failed. The rock behind it looked flattened, distant, as though depth itself had been pressed backward. The screaming resumed, but quieter now, lower, layered with something new. Breathing, not fast, measured. Jonah Pike backed into the wall, shaking. It's matching us. The shape leaned slightly. The sound of breath changed, adjusted. Crow raised his hand slowly. The shape paused. Mullins felt his mouth go dry. It's watching reaction, he whispered. Not movement. Avery's voice trembled. It's not attacking. The screaming softened again, retreating into a low, resonant hum that vibrated through bone. Then deliberately the shape shifted sideways, placing itself between them and the deeper tunnel. Blocking, Crow spoke quietly. It's not hunting us. Mullins finished the thought. It's isolating us. Without warning, Avery's lantern went out. Not flickered, extinguished. Darkness surged inward. Avery cried out, panic breaking through. I can't see. The screaming surged instantly, violent and close, the sound swelling as if fed by fear. The shape moved, not toward Avery, toward the sound of his voice. Crow grabbed Avery and yanked him backward just as the darkness where the shape stood pressed forward, compressing the air violently. Avery screamed again. The screaming below matched him. Perfectly, Mullins shouted over the noise. Back now! They moved blindly, dragging Avery, lanterns shaking, breath ragged. The screaming followed, but not quickly, patiently, adjusting distance. Whenever they stopped, it stopped. Whenever they rushed, it surged closer. Jonah Pike sobbed openly. It knows how fast we move. They reached a narrow tunnel again, forcing themselves through single file, boots slipping on wet stone. Behind them, the screaming fractured into overlapping tones, some high, some low, stacked like voices learning harmony. As they neared the first chamber, the screaming stopped abruptly. Silence returned with crushing weight. Crow turned slowly. The shape was no longer visible, but the air felt occupied. Mullins whispered, "It doesn't need to follow." Avery clutched his head, rocking. "It learned us." Jonah Pike nodded weakly. "It knows where we sound best." They burst into daylight, gasping, collapsing into snow, lungs burning. Cold air cut sharply, grounding them in a world that suddenly felt fragile and thin. No sound followed them out. The cave mouth breathed steadily, innocently. Too innocently. Too innocently. Mullins lay staring at the sky, hands shaking uncontrollably. "That wasn't a cave," he whispered. Crow stared at the entrance. "No, it's a throat." As they staggered back toward camp, none of them noticed the detail that would later haunt the investigation. Their footsteps echoed, not from behind, from beneath the ridge. Delayed, layered, returned, deep underground, where stone should have swallowed sound. The screaming began, again now carrying traces of human breath, human cadence, human fear. The cave had heard them clearly, and it had learned enough. After the second descent, the mountain stopped pretending to be quiet. The change was subtle at first, small enough that men could have convinced themselves it was exhaustion, winter nerves, or imagination. But those who worked closest to the ridge felt it immediately. Sound traveled differently. Snow settled strangely. Even the wind seemed to avoid certain angles, slipping around the limestone face instead of striking it directly. The cave was no longer contained. It had begun to reach outward. Logging continued, because it had to. Timber contracts did not pause for unease. Axes fell. Saws screamed. Trees cracked and groaned as they toppled into snow. But the rhythm was wrong. Every sharp sound echoed longer than it should have, returning thin and distorted, as if the mountain were holding it briefly before releasing it again. Men stopped mid-swing to listen. Conversations died quickly, replaced by glances toward the ridge. Jonah Pike noticed something else. The campfires no longer sounded the same. Wood popped and hissed, but the echoes came back, flattened, pressed thin like breath, forced through narrow stone. "They're bouncing off the caves," Pike muttered. Samuel Crow shook his head. "No, they're going into them." By the third night after the second descent, The screaming was no longer confined to darkness. It came just before dawn, low, distant, threaded through the fog like a memory, half remembered. The sound rose and fell unevenly, sometimes breaking into shorter bursts, sometimes stretching into a long, wavering cry that made men clutch their ears without realizing why. It never came from the same place twice. Sometimes it sounded deep beneath the ridge. Other times, close and near enough that men swore it came from the lane. Once, briefly, it echoed from directly beneath the camp. Henslow ordered a head count. Everyone was accounted for. Footprints appeared along the cave trail. Not boots, not animals. The impressions were shallow and elongated, pressed into snow that should have held deeper marks. The spacing was inconsistent, sometimes too close, sometimes too far, as if whatever made them had not yet settled on a proper stride. Crow studied them carefully. "It's trying distance," he said. "Seeing what fits." Mullins swallowed. "Fits where?" Crow did not answer. On the fourth day, a rope line snapped inside the cave without warning. No one was descending at the time. The rope had been secured properly, checked twice, weighted well beyond the strain it should ever face. Yet it parted cleanly, as if sliced rather than pulled. When Mullins inspected the break, he found something worse. The fibers were not frayed outward. They were pressed inward, compressed, as if something had closed around them slowly and then released. Against Pike's protests, Mullins insisted on one more controlled entry. "No voices," he said firmly. "No shouting. Minimal sound." They would not descend deep, just enough to confirm whether the cave had changed structurally. Crow agreed reluctantly. "This time," he said, "it won't wait for us to speak." They entered at midday, lanterns shielded, steps measured. The screaming did not greet them. Instead, the cave hummed. A low, constant vibration filled the passages, too steady to be air, too irregular to be machinery. It pressed against the chest, making breathing feel shallow. Avery whispered, "It's like standing inside an organ." Pike's voice shook. "Or a throat." Stone surfaces that had been slick before now felt dry and warm to the touch. Moisture had retreated deeper, pooling out of sight. Chalk marks Avery had left days earlier were gone, not smeared or washed away, but absorbed. Crow pressed his ear to the wall. The humming changed pitch instantly. He pulled back sharply. "It's listening," he said. The sound adjusted again, as if acknowledging the withdrawal.
What happened here was never fully recorded, and this is only one of many forgotten encounters. Subscribe and continue into the past.
They did not see the shape this time. They felt it. Pressure moved through the cave like a slow tide, compressing space ahead and releasing it behind. Lantern light bent subtly, not enough to notice directly, but enough to create a sense of imbalance. Mullins felt nauseous. "This isn't geology," he said. "It's response." As if answering, the humming broke briefly into a sharp, rising scream, short, clipped, controlled. It sounded almost instructional. Avery covered his ears. "It's changing its sound." Crow nodded grimly. "Because sound works on us." The aggression did not come from the thing itself. It came from the cave. Without warning, the floor ahead of Pike dipped, not collapsing, but compressing downward by several inches. Pike cried out and stumbled, barely catching himself, before sliding into a newly formed incline that had not existed moments before. The cave was reshaping itself. Not dramatically, precisely. Mullins shouted, "Out! Now!" As they turned, the humming surged louder, filling the chamber with layered tones that overlapped and folded into each other. High, low, broken, steady. The screaming returned, not frantic, not loud. Close, too close. They ran. Not blindly, but desperately, following memory rather than sight. Lanterns swung wildly, shadows leaping and collapsing as passages subtly altered angles, distances stretching and shrinking unpredictably. Whenever Avery stumbled and cried out, the screaming surged closer. Whenever they fell silent, it softened. Pike understood first. "It wants us loud," he gasped. "That's how it tracks." They forced themselves quiet, breath ragged, moving slowly despite panic clawing at their chests. The screaming fell back, frustrated, searching. As they neared the entrance, they passed through a chamber none of them recognized. Wide, smooth-walled, perfectly rounded, like stone worn by centuries of water X. No water had ever flowed there. At its center, the humming intensified sharply. Avery froze. "This wasn't here," he whispered. The screaming cut off abruptly. Silence crashed down. Then, from every direction, at once, came a sound that froze them in place. Breathing, multiple rhythms, overlapping, practicing. At the far edge of the chamber, the darkness thickened, not moving forward, condensing. The same absence they had seen before pressed itself into vertical form, adjusting slowly, occupying space with unsettling deliberation. It did not rush. It did not threaten. It simply stood where sound behaved best. Crow felt his knees weaken. "It doesn't need to chase us," he whispered. "The cave does that." The shape leaned slightly. The breathing changed, matched Crow's pace. Mullins raised his lantern higher. The light dimmed instantly, as if absorbed. The shape did not retreat. Instead, the chamber walls seemed to curve inward, tightening subtly, sound bouncing faster, sharper, more focused. The screaming returned short bursts, now precise, testing reactions. Avery sobbed. "It's not trying to scare us." Pike finished the thought in a whisper. "It's trying to perfect us." The cave shuddered not violently, but decisively. Stones shifted, passages closed, and somewhere behind them, the sound of retreat disappeared. The cave did not collapse. That was the first mistake in understanding what followed. When the chamber tightened around them, it did so without violence, without the chaos of falling stone or the chaos men had been trained to expect underground. Instead, the walls pressed inward by degrees, sound compressing before matter did, turning every breath into an announcement. The screaming stopped. That silence was deliberate. Edgar Mullins realized too late that the cave had not trapped them by blocking exits. It had trapped them by removing options. Passages that had been opened moments before now curved subtly away, their angles altered just enough to confuse memory. Footsteps returned, out of order. Lantern light failed to reach corners that should have existed. Samuel Crow stood perfectly still, listening. "It's moving the space," he whispered. "Not us." The air thickened. Breathing felt resisted, as if the cave itself pushed back against each inhale. Without warning, the screaming returned directly behind them. Not loud, intimate, close enough that Jonah Pike felt warmth brush his ear. He screamed instinctively. The sound answered instantly. Perfectly, his own voice returned half a second later from directly in front of him. Stripped of panic, but identical in pitch and rhythm. Pike staggered backward, hands over his ears. "It's got my voice." Thomas Avery dropped to his knees, shaking. "It's keeping them." The screaming layered again Crow's breathing. Mullins' strained exhale. Fragments of earlier cries folded together into something structured. Learning. The absence at the far wall shifted. Not advancing. Recentering. The darkness compressed. Edges smoothing. Height adjusting until it occupies space like a standing figure, not because it had legs or form, but because it had learned that shape mattered. Crow felt his throat tighten. "It's practicing how to stand where we fear most." Mullins raised his lantern again. The light dimmed further. The cave preferred darkness now. The attack did not involve claws or force. It involved sound. A sudden, focused scream erupted sharp, narrow, directed straight at Avery. The sound hit him like a physical blow. He clutched his head and screamed, blood trickling from his ear. The scream cut off. Avery's voice echoed back flat, calm, wrong. Then the scream resumed, stronger. Avery convulsed, gasping. "Make it stop, please," the cave answered. A repeating please in Avery's voice, perfectly paced, over and over. Crow lunged forward and dragged Avery backward, pressing his head against Crow's chest to muffle the sound. The screaming shifted immediately. Target changed. The floor sloped suddenly, not collapsing, tilting. Pike slid, scrabbling desperately for purchase as stone smoothed beneath his hands. Mullins grabbed him just in time, boots skidding, both men crashing hard against the wall. The cave corrected again. The slope eased. The screaming softened, as if acknowledging the adjustment. "It's regulating us," Mullins gasped. "Keeping us where it wants." Crow nodded grimly. Like air flew, a narrow passage opened abruptly to their left, one that had not existed before. The screaming surged toward it, drawing attention, pulling instinctively. Avery cried out again, jerking toward the sound. Crow tried to hold him. The floor dipped sharply. Avery slipped from Crow's grasp, sliding helplessly into the new passage as the walls narrowed behind him. His scream echoed once, then returned. "Altered," Mullins shouted his name. The cave answered with Avery's voice, calmly repeating it back. Then silence. The passage sealed. Jonah Pike collapsed, sobbing. It took him. It learned him. The humming returned, deeper now, resonating through bone. The shape shifted again, adjusting height, narrowing shoulders, learning proportion. Crow felt the terrible clarity of it. "It doesn't kill," he said. "It records." The screaming returned in Leia's Navarre's voice, woven into the others, balanced and controlled. Not chaotic, curated. The cave moved again, this time behind them. The exit passage narrowed suddenly, stone pressing inward without cracking. Pike tried to run. The sound of his footsteps triggered an immediate response. The screaming focused. The air compressed violently around Pike's chest, knocking the breath from him. He dropped, gasping. Crow reached him. The floor beneath Pike softened, not crumbling, opening. Pike's scream rose and was cut off as the stone closed smoothly over him. No blood, no debris, just absence. The cave inhaled. Only Mullins and Crow remained. The screaming quieted again, reorganizing, voices blending into a low, steady resonance that filled the chamber evenly. The shape stepped forward, not walking, repositioning closer. Mullins felt his legs fail. He dropped to one knee, staring into the absence that now occupied the center of the chamber. "This isn't exploration," he whispered. "This is selection." Crow nodded once. "And it's not finished." Crow did the unthinkable. He screamed, not in panic, in defiance. A raw, uncontrolled sound ripped from his chest, echoing violently through the chamber. The screaming responded instantly, but this time it faltered. The cave hummed irregularly. The shape paused. The sound warped. Crow shouted again, louder. The screaming fractured, overlapping too quickly. Voices misaligned. The cave staggered. Mullins realized the truth too late. "Too much sound," he gasped. "It can't balance it." The cave surged violently, not collapsing. Stone shifted rapidly. The chamber compressed hard. Crow shoved Mullins toward the narrowing exit. "Go!" The screaming surged into chaos. Crow turned back and vanished as the darkness closed around him. The shape folded inward violently, consuming space. Mullins ran blindly, lungs burning, sound exploding behind him. The cave twisted and reformed, passages snapping shut moments after he passed. The screaming pursued, but unfocused now, layered too densely, voices overlapping without structure. It had lost balance. Mullins burst into daylight, screaming, collapsing into snow, blood streaming from his ears. Behind him, the cave fell silent, not defeated, reset. The logging camp found Mullins hours later, half frozen, incoherent, clawing at the ground. He never returned to the cave. He never returned to the mountain. But deep beneath the ridge, where stone no longer followed surface rules, the screaming reorganized itself, discarding excess, refining cadence, keeping what worked. 3 voices were gone. 1 remained. and the cave remembered them all. Edgar Mullins did not remember leaving the cave. Later, when men asked him to describe how he escaped, his answers never aligned with time or distance. He spoke instead of pressure easing, of sound breaking apart into pieces too small to follow, of the ground suddenly cold beneath his hands. The mountain, he said, had let him go. That distinction mattered to him more than anything else. Mullins was found at first light, half buried in snow near the tree line, boots torn, gloves missing, ears bleeding. His lantern lay several yards away, intact but extinguished. He did not resist when they lifted him. He did not ask for the others. He stared past the men who carried him, eyes fixed on the ridge. When the screaming rose again faint, distant, he flinched violently and clutched at the air. "Too many," he whispered. "It can't hold them all." They did not understand. They would not ask again. For days, Mullins drifted in and out of awareness. Fever took him. So did silence. When he spoke, it was in fragments, carefully chosen, as if language itself had become dangerous. "They're not dead," he said once, staring at the wall. "They're placed." Another time, it doesn't keep bodies. It keeps patterns. When pressed for names, Avery, Ike, Crowhey shook his head violently. "Don't say them," he begged. "It knows them already." The search lasted 3 days. Men approached the cave mouth with ropes and lanterns, standing at the threshold without crossing it. The air poured out steadily, warm and wet against the cold. Sound behaved strangely near the entrance, forces flattening, footsteps returning from below. No one descended. Henslow ordered a cursory inspection of the immediate tunnel no farther than daylight could reach. They found nothing altered at the surface. No blood, no broken stone, no sign of collapse. The cave looked unchanged. That frightened them more than damage would have. On the second night of the search, the screaming returned in force. It rose after midnight, threading through trees and snow like a signal meant only for those who listened. The sound was layered now, high and low, calm and strange shifting tones without pause. Several men swore they heard words inside it, not spoken clearly. Suggested a cadence that matched human speech without forming language. One man dropped his axe and ran. No one stopped him. By the third morning, Henslow made the only decision he believed would end it. They would seal the cave. Dynamite was set carefully around the entrance. Charges placed to collapse the opening without disturbing the ridge itself. Mullins protested weakly from his cot. "You can't bury sound," he rasped. "It travels." No one listened. The blast thundered through the forest, echoing violently, snapping branches and shaking snow loose from the pines. Stone collapsed inward, sealing the entrance beneath tons of rubble. For a long moment afterward, the mountain was silent. Men exhaled in relief. Then faintly from beneath the collapsed stone, the screaming resumed. Muffled, contained, but unchanged. The logging camp did not last the winter. Men requested transfers. Accidents increased. Tools went missing. Fires burned unpredictably. Sound near the ridge continued to behave, incorrectly echoing late, returning altered. By spring, operations were suspended indefinitely. The mountain was left alone. No markers were placed. No warnings posted. It did not need them. Edgar Mullins survived another 6 months. He never recovered his hearing fully. Loud sounds caused him physical pain. Silence unsettled him even more. Before his death, he dictated a final statement to a local clerk. It was brief. The cave was not empty. It was incomplete. It uses sound the way we use light to measure, to shape, to remember. Those taken were not consumed. They were kept in function. The clerk did not understand the last sentence. He did not ask for clarification. No remains were recovered. No personal effects surfaced. No secondary exits were discovered, despite later surveys of the ridge. The cave system beneath the collapse remained inaccessible, its interior shape unknown. Geologists who examined the site years later noted something unusual. Seismic readings suggested hollow spaces beneath the ridge that did not match known cave formations. The data was filed. No expedition followed. What happened to Samuel Crowe, Thomas Avery, and Jonah Pike? The simplest answer: death did not satisfy those who had heard the screaming. Because death ended things, and whatever lived beneath the ridge did not end anything. It reorganized. It refined. It kept what worked. Years later, a road crew blasting rocks several miles from the original site reported hearing sounds through the stone during drilling. Not collapse, not machinery. A low, layered resonance that caused men to remove their ear protection instinctively, hands shaking. The crew moved their operation without explanation. The ridge remained intact. In his last days, Edgar Mullins refused silence. He kept a radio playing softly at all hours, not music, but voices, news, static, anything layered and uncontrolled. When asked why, he answered simply, "It can't keep what it can't balance." On the night he died, the radio cut out abruptly. For several seconds, the room filled with a sound no one could place. Then silence returned. Deep beneath the mountain, where Stone had learned to listen, something shifted, discarding excess, retaining pattern, preparing. Because the screaming in the caves had never been a warning. It had been a process. The incident appears only as a brief disruption in logging operations near a limestone ridge. 4 men entered a cave. 1 returned alive. The site was abandoned soon after. No special designation was given to the mountain. No warning was issued. No coroner's report followed. No remains were listed. The cave collapse was cited as a preventative measure, not a response. The wording suggested closure, finality, and ending that reassured those who read it later. But for those who had heard the screaming, closure never arrived. The ridge was never named on official maps. Surveyors marked it as uneven terrain and routed future work around it. Trails faded. Trees reclaimed logging paths. Snow covered what dynamite could not erase. And yet, the place remained known. Locals referred to it indirectly. The quiet ridge. The listening stone. The place where sound doesn't leave. No one camped there. No one hunted near it. Over time, stories changed shape. Some said the cave had been inhabited by something ancient, awakened by blasting. Others claimed it was not a creature at all, but a living cave stone that learned sound the way moss learned light. Children were warned not to shout near cliffs, not because something would answer. He never had to. Decades after the expedition vanished, hikers occasionally reported strange acoustics near the ridge, voices echoing too clearly, footsteps returning delayed, as if replayed. One geologist recorded a low-frequency resonance beneath the area during seismic testing. The site was removed from further study. Edgar Mullins' final statement circulated briefly among academics before being dismissed as the product of trauma. But one sentence lingered. It uses sound, the way we use light, to measure, to shape, to remember. Years later, a researcher noted that the cave system's geometry based on incomplete scans appeared to favor resonance chambers over collapse zones. As if shaped deliberately to capture and sustain vibration. The paper was never published. Across the decades, similar reports surfaced elsewhere. Caves where screams echoed back incorrectly. Mines where voices returned after workers had left. It did not chase blindly. It adjusted. It isolated. It refined. And when balance was restored, it released what no longer fit. Some places do not exist to be explored.
What happened here was never fully recorded, and this is only one of many forgotten encounters. Subscribe and continue into the past.